I request Khadilkar sir to open this address.
Okay. So good evening to all of you. And let me welcome you to this fantastic activity that the FINE Foundation has started. As you know, FINE was doing a lot of activities for the consultants. But now FINE has started a student program. And the student program will take two shapes. One is preparing theory, and the other is preparing you all for practicals. So today, the Tuesday evening tutorials are the theory modules. As you know, there are 4 papers which cover various aspects of neurology. And Dr. Shripad Pujari, with the help of Dr. Kothari, me, and Dr. Gursahani, is going to bring out the topics that you need in your theory for the first paper, second paper, third, and fourth. But the format is a quick fire format. In a few minutes, the speaker will give you what you require and will also give you reference readings on which you need to build. So do enjoy this program. Let's get on with the theory preparation, and also send your suggestions so that with every program, Shripad can go on improving. Welcome.
Thank you, Satish. We will do a poll after 1 or 2 of these sessions, so we get an idea from everybody what to improve, how to improve, and what topics they want, etc. We'll do that later. Okay. So Shripad, you can start. Shripad is the architect of the whole thing, with of course Satish guiding behind it.
Yes, with guidance of all of you. As Dr. Khadilkar said, we have begun with our first of its kind FINE evening tutorials. As Dr. Khadilkar said, it's mainly aimed at the PGs and also for those consultant neurologists in practice who want to stay updated. So our today's module is the first module of the 2 for migraine. And in the first module, as you've already received the flyer, the first lecture is by Dr. Palasdevkar, who is the neurologist from Pune, and it is on etiopathogenesis of migraine. I hand over the session to Dr. Palasdevkar, ask him to share and begin his lecture.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before, I'll just interrupt. Those who want to get the links, that means the information and the link for next time's program, please WhatsApp or message Shripad and he will include you in a group, because we will be no longer sending the links to all sorts of groups because there are too many messages going to many groups. So only now we will, after 1 or 2 of these programs, we will send only to those who have asked for it. So please message Shripad and make sure you are included in that.
Great. Off to Nilesh.
Good evening, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening, all. And I thank FINE and Dr. Pujari for inviting me for this. And it is always a pleasure and a privilege to be on any FINE platform. As Khadilkar sir has already told that this is basically to prepare the exam going students and reduce their burden for preparation of their DM exam in this COVID times. So basically, we are going to start with the first lecture, that is the etiopathogenesis of migraine. This will come as a question in your basic sciences, and I guess it is going to be a long question. So what I have divided, that what I have comprehensively reviewed whatever current literature that is available regarding the etiopathogenesis of migraine, and I have compiled in a few tabulated form. You will find a lot of tables, you will see a few simple diagrams, and you will see many headings. So the idea is that when you write your answer in your exam, you will elaborate these headings or try to explain these diagrams. So basically, we are going to discuss regarding genetics of migraine, what is the vascular theory, what is the neurogenic theory, what is the concept of cortical spreading depression, how the trigeminal cervical complex causes the pain, and how it is modulated by the central pain modulation centers, what are the neuropeptides involved, and how we can practically apply this in the therapy of migraine. So we all know that migraine is the most common disabling primary headache. The global prevalences of the episodic migraine is some 12%. It is more common in female, around 18%, and 6% in males. The chronic is around 1 to 2%. And it is defined by CDC as a unilateral throbbing headache, which is associated with nausea, multisensitive sensory hypersensitivity like photophobia, phonophobia, osmophobia. And the symptomatology of migraine is quite diverse. That we have got migraine with aura, migraine without aura. Then we have got basilar migraine. We have got ophthalmoplegic migraine. So basically, it involves lot of whole nervous system as such, including the somatosensory, the autonomic, endocrine, arousal network. So we have got many theories which have been proposed, because migraine is a disease of the software of the brain. As such, there is no problem with the brain as such, but it is the networking of the brain which causes migraine. So the knowledge of migraine keeps on progressing, and what I am trying will explain you what is the correct concept which might change in near future. We all know that migraine is a hereditary disease. If a patient with migraine comes, usually we have got a first degree relative who also has got migraine. There was a large Danish study where they evaluated around 3,000 twins. Around 1,600 were monozygotic, the other were dizygotic, and they found that migraine with aura is more genetically heredited than with a migraine without aura. And they found that the risk of having migraine with aura is almost 4 times, or 50% twins who are monozygotic, they might develop migraine. However, which exactly gene causes it, we don't know. There are a lot of genetic polymorphisms which have been studied, but pinpointing that this one particular gene causes, or the transmission is either dominant, or whether it is recessive, or whether it's X-linked, that we don't know. So it is a genetically heterogenic disease, which is influenced by the environment factors, which is almost case of each and every neurological disease that we know. However, of special interest is familial hemiplegic migraine, where we have been able to pinpoint the specific gene which causes it. And then familial hemiplegic migraine has been divided in type 1, type 2, type 3, which is associated with migraine and hemiplegia, which can be lasting for 2 to 3 days. And these all are channelopathies, or these are ionopathies. So each of this has been linked to a gene which codes for a protein in a channel, and the channel dysfunction is what leads to familial hemiplegic migraine. So one theory is that migraine might be a ionopathy. We have got familial hemiplegic 1 and 3, which is basically related to the sodium channel, and familial hemiplegic migraine 2, which is related to calcium channel. And finally, what they lead, they increase the glutamate. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, as you know, and it causes increase in the NMDA, and it increases the neurologic hyperexcitability, and it increases the potassium. If we know our action potential, which was there, which we are studying in physiology, if the potassium increases, it causes depolarization and it causes a wave. So increase in hyperexcitability and increase in potassium, it basically leads to something that is cortical spreading depression, and that leads to migraine aura. These disorders have also associated with some other neurological condition, like FHM1 type gene is associated with episodic ataxia type 2. Also in these patients, the migraine can lead to prolonged coma, and the migraine can be triggered by simple head trauma. And FHM2, familial hemiplegic migraine 2, has been associated with epilepsy. Okay, we all know that migraine has got a prodromal phase. 1 day or 2 days prior, this patient, they present with non-specific neck pain, lot of yawning, food cravings, fatigue, and cognitive difficulties. So this has been thought to be caused due to hypothalamus. So the PET scan studies have shown that this begins in the hypothalamus. There is increased activity of hypothalamus, and hypothalamus has been postulated in initiation as well as continuation of the migraine. So it is important in initiation of episodic migraine as well as chronic migraine. There are particularly the anterior and the posterior nuclei. They are concerned with the orexinergic pathway. Again, orexin has got 2 types of neurotransmitters, A and B. A reduces pain while B increases pain. So hypothalamus has thought to be modulating the trigeminal cervicogenic ganglion. It is also concerned with the homeostatic changes in migraine. In migraine, there can be circadian rhythm, there can be decrease in the appetite, there can be sudden behavior. So hypothalamus have been postulated to cause the prodromal phase, and also as a to modulate the pain in migraine. So now we go further to the vascular theory of migraine. So initially it was thought that there is a hereditary susceptibility brain. So this is a maladaptive brain, and it is susceptible to migraine. And when it is subjected to any kind of stress, either that is emotional stress, physical stress, or homeostatic stress, then it leads to some vascular abnormal vascular reactivity of the intracranial and intracranial blood vessels. So initially it was thought that aura, which is basically focal ischemia, and it can lead to somatosensory aura, it can lead to vascular aura, or it can lead to other types of aura. And it was thought that earlier there is vasoconstriction, and because of ischemia, we get focal symptomatology, and later there is vasodilation, and that leads to pulsatile headache. However, this theory is no longer considered true because there were certain pitfalls. So MRI's perfusion study shows that before hyperemia, there is a oligomia, and the perfusion abnormalities which are seen in perfusion studies do not correlate with the site of aura. For example, whenever there is occipital aura, visual aura, we expect that there is a oligema in the occipital lobe, but that is not the case. And the aura, it spreads beyond vascular territory, that it can involve the PCA, MCA, or the ACA territory. So that doesn't fit into single vascular territory. And again, the head can be on the same side. So that doesn't go with the vascular theory, and it can't explain the premonitory phase where only the hypothalamus is involved, and the diffusion weighted MRI does not show any restriction. So currently, the vascular theory, it is not considered. What we consider more common is the neurogenic theory. So what they suggest that aura is basically neurogenic inflammation which starts in one part of the brain and then it spreads. So why it starts in one part of brain, basically the occipital. So they have thought that there are certain focal energy alteration, which basically it might be due to magnesium deficiency or some uncoupling of mitochondrial enzymes. So that leads to oligemia in that part. And then this oligemia further causes decrease in the gating of NMDA receptor that increases the glutamate. It causes neuronal hyperexcitability. And again, as I told, that there is increase in the depolarization caused by influx of potassium. So this leads to neuronal hyperexcitability and a spreading depression, which usually starts from the occipital lobe and then it spreads from gyri to gyri, sulci to sulci. And this has been demonstrated in the PET scan. And this further leads to something called as cortical spreading depression, where the metabolic need goes down and there is decrease in the blood flow. So basically, it is an energy perturbation, maybe due to magnetic deficiency, a phase of hyperexcitability followed by cortical spreading depression. So there are certain drugs which can be used at this stage. One is tonaberostat. They have found that this drug, it inhibits the cortical spreading depression. It decreases the aura, but it can't prevent the headache. So I had got a patient who just had aura. There would be visual aura multiple times a day, and that never went to headache. His headache was well controlled with propranolol, but I had no drug to give for his visual aura, and he finally developed a scotoma, which was permanent. So drugs, there are like tonaberostat. This can decrease the aura. The topiramate and certain sodium and glutamate NMDA-based drugs, they can also decrease the formation of aura. Okay. So once this aura is formed, comes the afferent. So we know that there are certain areas of the brain which are only pain sensitive. Main are the blood vessels. The blood vessels, we have got the meninges and we have got the dura. So from the head, basically the trigeminal nerve, basically the ophthalmic nerve, and from the cervical fibers, they relay in the trigeminal cervical complex, and from there, the trigeminal complexes, there are many of projections which go to brain. They go to hypothalamus, they go to the brainstem structures like locus ceruleus, they go to periaqueductal gray matter, and then it relays in the thalamus, and thalamus, it goes to the somatosensory area. So this is the ascending tract. There is also descending tract which modulates the brain, which starts from the cortex, which goes to the thalamus, which goes to the hypothalamus, and which again modulates the trigeminal cervical complex. Okay, so we have got a path which goes up and there is modulation. So where there are certain parts which are shown to basically cause certain symptoms of migraine. One is the parabrachial projections. Basically, that is the limbic system. So because of involvement of this system, there is difference in the energy balance. The patient, they have fatigue. There is taste aversion. There is a loss of appetite, and they have got triggers like high salt or bitter taste. The involvement of the limbic and amygdala leads to behavioral changes, the mood changes. It can increase the response to pain and certain aversive behaviors. We have got a trigeminal autonomic reflex, which basically involves the parasympathetic fibers from the superior cerebrospinal nucleus and the spinopyramidal ganglion. It affects the sleep-wake cycle. It causes disturbances in the circadian rhythm. It causes the stress response. We have got also the thalamic nuclei, where the ventral, posterior, medial, and lateral. So there is the integration of the pain fibers, the touch, the visual, the olfactory fibers, and that basically leads to the photophobia, phonophobia, the aversion, and osmophobia. We have got the medullary centers like rostral, ventromedial nuclei, the raphe magnus, the diencephalon, and the hypothalamus. So these also affect the can contribute to the symptomatology of migraine. So these also centers have been activated during a migraine attack. Then we have got a central pain modulation center, which basically involves the modulates the trigeminal nucleus. We have got important is a periactivated gray matter in the brain stem. It is activated in both chronic migraine as well as episodic attack. So what happens? They have thought that in patients who have got very severe migraine, the connections with the pain perception they have increased, while the connection with the pain reception area that is decreased. And on autopsy study, they have found that there is calcium deposition in this area, and also there is decrease in the volume. So we have got the periaquital gray matter. Then they have also found that they have in rostral ventromedial medulla there are on fibers and off fibers which secretes the calcitonin gene related peptide and the serotonin, and it can affect the migraine. Again, we have got the locus cerularis. We have got orexin A gene, which is pain suppressing, and orexin B, which basically pain increasing. So this area is also important in migraine pain, and is also important in behavioral and pain related issues with migraine. Again, what happens? All these centers, they secrete certain neuropeptides. We all know that 5-HT1 or then serotonin. It has been found that during the migraine attack, the platelets and the periaquital gray matter, they increase the serotonin. Also, the metabolite of serotonin, that is 5-hydroxy acetic acid, that is also increased in urine. So serotonin basically has a role in nociception, the mood changes, and sleep disorders in migraine, and this increase during migraine attack. We also have got drugs, neuropeptides like the calcitonin gene related peptides, the nitric oxide and substance P. So what happens? This is secreted by the afferent trigeminal nerve around the dura mater, along the blood vessels. So that leads to something that is called as neurogenic inflammation. So that increases the temperature over there. It causes allodynia. It increases the rubor, pallor, tender. So basically they cause vasodilatation, they lead to endothelial damage, plasma leakage, platelet aggregation, and mast cell regranulation. All these things leads to allodynia, increased pain perception, and irritability in migraine. So current therapies are also there to modulate the neuropeptides, which Dr. Pujari is going to discuss in detail. So ultimately, what is migraine? It is a maladaptive brain. It can't adapt due to genetic and environmental factors. Due to some energy perturbation and some disorders in the hypothalamus, we get the activation of the cortical spreading depression, which is basically spreads from the occipital area and it comes anteriorly, and then it activates the trigeminal complex in the pons as well as these cervical spinal cord, and it leads to peripheral neurogenic inflammation, and this is modulated by the central pain modulation fibers. So that is what has been current theory, which involves the etiopathogenesis of migraine. So for further reading, you can go through Bradley. There is a headache issue of continuum also addresses it well, and most of my current things which I have discussed from the neurology clinics, November 2019 issue. Thank you. So we will be taking questions right now.
You can take, Shripad, 5 minutes, you can take questions.
Yes, sir, for this session, we don't have many questions. There's only one simple question. How long will you explain a patient? How will you explain patient about migraine in normal layman language, Dr. Palsevkar?
Basically, what I explained that migraine is basically problem with the software of the brain. Anybody would get a headache if they are if they have a lot of stress or there is some change in daily schedule, but the sensitivity of people with migraine, it is low. So their brain is oversensitive to any of these perturbations in day-to-day life, and they usually have got a lower threshold, and this lower threshold is due to different circuits and certain neurotransmitters in the brain, and because of that, if they are subjected to any kind of stress, they might get migraine-like headache. I mean, it is a disease of the software of the brain. The hardware is all okay. It is basically how the brain responds to any kind of stress. So it's a maladaptive brain. Dr. Kothari sir likes to use this word. It is maladaptation of the brain to normal stresses of life.
Very well explained. But one little minor, I would say, suggestion. People don't like when you tell it is due to stress. People don't like the word stress. So if you just say that your migraine is due to stress, people will not like it. So when you tell a patient, you have to tell them that what I tell them is that you have inherited a tendency from your parents. Usually it's your mother or father. And so your brain is a little more sensitive. They like the word sensitive, you know. So it is more sensitive to change. It does not like change. So if you don't sleep well, if you don't eat well, if there is and then you push in the stress part, then people accept. But if you just say only stress, then the husband will look at the wife and say, I stress, you know. So it's little, you have to be very careful with the word stress in India. People don't like to say there is stress. So it, and often it's not always stress. Sometimes it is hormones. Sometimes it is periods. Sometimes it's not eating in time. Sometimes it's not sleeping well. So it may be it's too much noise. So anything which I try to tell somebody, that person who asks in simple language, it depends on how that person in front is. In that, if you can say, sometimes I can tell a patient that तुम्ही डोक्याला त्रास करून घेताय म्हणून डोकं दुखतंय किंवा कोणीतरी तुमच्या डोक्याला त्रास देतंय म्हणून डोकं दुखतंय. If you can get this through, it's very easy. But sometimes you cannot tell this. So, but in one line, it is that his brain is sensitive. It is getting troubled. Pawan, you want to add something? Pawan is smiling away.
No, I have many things to say, so I'll keep shut here.
Yes, that what Dr. Kothari said is exactly what is a simple word translation of the scientific content that Parsav said just now. I think sensitive equivalents to maladaptive, isn't it, sir?
Yes, yes. Yeah, it is. Nilesh, you made a very nice presentation. You put it very well. How the genetic and environmental thing gets together and this thing. One way, another thing you can also say is that everybody's brain can get headache. Some people have a lower threshold, and because of various things, your threshold is a little lower. So when there's too much noise, when there's too much lack of sleep, or you don't eat in time, you will get headache. So we have to. The thing that comes from this is that it implies that you cannot cure migraine. You have to learn how to live with it and not cure it.
Yes, and in a way, Kothari sir, you are right. Everybody in his life at some point is going to suffer an attack of migraine, correct? So in a way, everybody has that different reactivity.
Yeah, but some people don't go by that thing. I believe that. I feel migraine is a normal sort of response of the brain.
Yes,
only the people with migraine, which we say, have a lower threshold. Everybody's brain has the capacity to get migraine.
Migraine, absolutely. There's one suggestion for the speakers from the audience. Go slightly slowly because they are unable to pick up points from the slides, very good slides that you make. You are delivering.
But all the slides will be available. See, the problem is you have given them only 15 minutes or 20 minutes.
Yes.
So
yes.
They also have to cover a lot of ground.
Yeah. But they are all available to all the audience. The slides will all be available. Again, the whole lecture, sir, is available, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be heard again. Yeah.
We'll put it up. You can ask him the last two questions, the two more questions, then we go to the next speaker.
Yes. How, Dr. Parsav, how visual aura of migraine is different from occipital seizure biologically and clinically?
Yeah. So we all know that both kind of visual aura that can come in migraine as well as occipital lobe seizure. So basically, the understanding is that migraine aura, it will start from in both eyes. Both occipital would be also both eyes, and migraine there will be scintillating scotoma, which will go on increasing, and at times it might have some colors. Okay, so it would be at the edge that you would be finding scintillating colors. While in the occipital aura, it is usually black and white. So it is not that colorful, and the scintillating quality. If you show the patient what kind of that you go, that is very classical with migraine aura. And usually migraine aura would be usually followed by a headache, while occipital aura, it might be followed by a convulsing event. So basically you ask whether it is colorful or not colorful, whether it expands or it not expands, and whether they can see it's just something picture or it is some kind of scenery. Scenery usually comes with a temporal lobe epilepsy, while occipital lobe it is usually a black and white aura, while the migraine aura can be colorful.
There's one more thing. The occipital epilepsy also often complain that they see colorful balloons, circles. So they see circles, round balloons or bubbles, which may be colorful also. That is, the circles thing is very typical of occipital epilepsy. And sometimes it's difficult because it can also be followed by post-ictal headache. And therefore, it can be difficult. Of course, he asks you biologically. So biologically, both are totally different. One is a seizure, it's an epileptic, and migraine is not a seizure.
Cortical depression, yeah. Last question, Dr. Palazhikar, how migraine in elderly, the classic migraine with later age of onset, how does it differ clinically?
The epidemiological studies have proved that migraine, usually 90% of the migraine, they are going to begin before the age of 40. So if somebody has got a migraine like headaches after 40, you have to consider it as migraine mimics or secondary migraine. The migraine with aura classically presents in adolescence, and as the age increases, the aura usually subsides and it is only migraine. And in the around third to fourth decade, there is a slight overlap between migraine-like headaches and the tension-type headaches, especially in the males. So it is more of a chronic migraine kind of pain, where the nausea part and the photophobia part decreases, and more of kind it is a chronic headache which is boring, more of bifrontal or occipital, without the aura and without the nausea or vomiting. So as the age increases, basically migraine transfers more on a chronicity increases, and the pattern it goes more likely to be a tension type headache, which is holocranial, not that severe boring kind of headache which increases at the end of the day.
The last question is how does vomiting stop migraine? What is the pathogenesis behind it? You know, they say, patients typically say, I vomited and the migraine went up.
Basically, as we have seen, that as the migraine progresses from the corticus spreading depression to the trigeminal cervical complex, finally it goes to the brainstem, that is the medulla, and it goes to hypothalamus. So these two parts, they are part of the homeostatic system, and we have got the chemoreceptor trigger zone over there. So probably when the patient vomits a lot, it is a pain modulating system, both from the thalamocortical areas as well as the hypothalamus and the rostroventral medulla, which probably come in action and they subside the migraine attack. So it is probably the pain modulation centers which are activated after the probably that cortical spreading depression, it reaches the brainstem, and that probably releases the headache once the patient vomits. So once the patient vomits, it is because the migraine attack, it has reached the hypothalamus and the rostroventral medulla, and the higher centers now they are taking over and they decrease the severity of the attack.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think let's progress to the next lecture. The next couple of lectures are on treatment. The first one by Dr. Oza on treatment of migraine. I request Dr. Oza to start his proceedings. Great.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shripad and Dr. Kothari, Dr. Khadilkar, everyone. Glad to see everyone here. Yeah, so there is the first slide that I'll be covering about both the acute as well as preventive aspects of treatment of migraine. So it's a very large topic and most of it is already known. So we will try and see how we can cover all these points. So whenever we want to attempt to write an answer, we should have a frame in our mind that at least these points we are going to cover. So it's a good idea to write it very briefly, whatever is mentioned in green and yellow, and spread out in the paper. So if you decide to write an answer over 2.5 sheets, then these headings should be spread out initially only, so that you can fill on later. And even if you forget to fill something, the examiner knows that you knew this heading. Well, so we discuss about acute treatment. We'll be talking about first line, rescue, as well as non-pharmacological treatment. In the prevention, we'll be talking about before prescription, prescription drugs, and after prescription. So these are the broad outlines that we'll be discussing. So in the acute treatment of migraine, our decisions to write medicines are based on the levels of evidence of efficacy as well as safety. But also we keep in mind patients' preferences, their tolerability of medicines, as well as any comorbidities that the patient might have. And whenever we discuss a plan of the acute treatment, many times the patient will not need preventive treatment because, the attacks are really infrequent, but when they occur, they are really bothersome. So it's a good idea to give them a stratified care plan that you are going to act like this for a mild headache. If it is not going to work like this, you are going to take this and third and so on. And discuss with them looking at their whatever are the factors associated. So if the person is wanting to be pregnant or pregnant, lactating, so there are many variables that we need to think. So probably work around that. There'll be some patients who would require or may opt for a non-pharmacological treatment also. So we'll go through one by one, but initially let's talk about the first line oral medicine. So these are the oral medicines all of us know, and all of us who have migraines, then we have already taken it. So the level of evidence of taking these medicines, by the American Headache Society is level A, and in the Canadian Headache Society, which are taken for reference, they are having a high level of recommendation in episodic migraine, which is mild, and a very strong recommendation also is that the level of the quality of evidence is very high. And this thing. So basically, two classes of medicines come in here: the analgesics and the NSAIDs, and the triptans. Well, there is also something more. So Ergot, they have discussed about DHE intranasal being a level A, but if you look at the Canadian guidelines, the evidence is only moderate and the recommendation is only very weak. So for now, we'll not talk about this. And something to learn here is the combination of sumatriptan with naproxen or acetaminophen, something like that, is also quite good and recommended well. And the talks about taking ergotamine, this is level C, opioids. So these are the few of them. They are not taken under usual circumstances, not allowed in episodic migraine under usual circumstances. So one by one, let's take it. The simple analgesics, they should be taken for mild, and occasionally they would work even in a severe migraine. The idea is to take them early, and which ones of them are preferable. So the A, long time favorite of many people, take 2 tablets of aspirin and sleep. So paracetamol, ibuprofen, naproxen, the personal favorite being naproxen. So naproxen does a 2-hour relief with the good chance of relief. It is also useful in nausea and photophobia, especially when it is combined with domperidone. One I like to highlight something here is that metoclopramide or Stemetil for that matter, which we take commonly in aspirin in alone or in combination with aspirin or paracetamol, might be very suitable in certain patients. And sometimes when it needs to be given an early stage and quick relief is desired, then you can take a solution of diclofenac sodium. So that's for the milder variety of migraines. Well, the specific medicines that triptans are more effective for moderate or severe headaches, but they should be taken early. We can write about these oral medicines, in brief, and look at the 2-hour relief is 42 to 76% as compared to placebo. So even if we look at the placebo and then think, you have a very high chance of getting a good relief. And as we discussed, the combination of sumatriptan as it available, 85 milligrams with naproxen 500 is like, 2-hour relief is 80%. But we need to highlight these contraindications that patients who have had history of stroke, myocardial infarction, coronary artery disease, better to stay away from these triptans. And hemiplegic migraine with brainstem aura, also we would like to remain away from them. So it's also a good idea to avoid rizatriptan and zolmitriptan, sumatriptan in 2 weeks of MAO inhibitor use for the fear of serotonin syndrome. However, on review of literature, we find that this incidence is very low. So, it's less than 0.3%. And we can discuss about newer formulations. Then what about the rescue medication? So look at this level C and level B recommendation. Level C is one which the evidence is not very great as of now, but it might be very useful in our scenario that, you give valproate whether it is epilepsy. We discussed about occipital aura and this and that, and it works. And if person is having migraine with aura, consider giving magnesium sulfate 1 to 2 milligrams. The other things we routinely know. We generally give injection Phenergan 1 ampule with diclofenac, so it also works very fine. And some people would like to use dexamethasone, so I think I'll just push this out. Sorry. Yeah. So yes. So then we need to give special consideration for pregnancy and lactation. Metoclopramide, acetaminophen appear to be safe. Triptans have an increased risk of preeclampsia, but many registries have shown that there is no real excess risk. But you need to discuss with the patient. And sumatriptan is found safe in lactation. So NSAIDs generally we would not like to recommend in first or third trimester because of the increased risk of IVH and miscarriages. So much so that we also need to talk about the non-pharmac treatment. So supraorbital TENS as well as single pulse TMS have been approved for acute treatment of migraine, and would be in the range of about 30 to 50% relief at 2 hours. Yeah. Now let's go on with the migraine prevention. So what we need to do before medication is to ask the patient to do a lifestyle modification, as we did discuss in the end of the previous talk, and maintain a headache diary. So regular sleep, meals, exercise, avoid the stress, and although it's a very complex process of trigger identification, but sometimes it might work in favor of the patient, that they just identify the trigger and take care of that. Good idea also to discuss about food and avoid caffeine overuse. There are some risk factors which we need to particularly talk to the patient regarding risk factors for chronification or increase in the frequency of migraine. They are like in the obesity, past history of any head or neck injury, any major life events, excessive use of caffeine, headache medicines, comorbid sleep, psychiatric and pain disorders. So these need to be individually addressed too. And sometimes we might get a good result without writing medicines specifically for migraine, only depending on time to time acute pain medicines. Well, if we need to give medicines, what are the indications? So the real indications are if the patient is having a headache with which there is a profound disability during each attack, maybe around 2 or more headaches, or if the patient has more than or equal to 3 headache days, then you need to consider and discuss with patient regarding migraine preventive medicine. So some patients are going to have a special indication like a hemiplegic migraine attack with permanent neurological deficit. So we need to discuss separate medicines for them. Now, how do we classify the medicines? So basically, we will be talking about drugs as well as nutraceuticals. So the nutraceuticals we'll be discussing separately. And drugs are mainly classified into 3 types. One is for hypertension, the other is for epilepsy, and third is for depression. So as these drugs, typically for the drugs for these conditions are taken lifelong, so we initially only discuss with the patient that this is probably a long life at least condition. Then you need to take longer dose and longer time duration of medicine. So we'll be discussing these drugs in 2 categories. One is with good evidence and the other with lower evidence. So what are the drugs available to us for prescription who have a very high level of evidence? So I particularly like this propranolol and amitriptyline combination that has been told to us by Dr. Gursani for over 20 years now, and it stays our favorite. So the propranolol and this thing, and then we can also talk about valproate, topiramate. So topiramate in particular is very, very useful and proven for chronic migraine. And although the Americans don't prescribe this, but flunarizine also is a good choice if you take care of all these side effects. In particular, the students should write at least 1 or 2 contraindications when you write a medicine, so that we understand that you are aware what all to monitor. What are the medicines which have low evidence of indication? That doesn't mean that they are not effective, but as of now, the evidence is low. So aspirin is coming up nicely, magnesium, coenzyme Q10, ACE inhibitors and ARBs. So, the lisinopril and the candesartan. Many of these patients who are started on antihypertensives for their hypertension, they have a lot of good relief in migraine, the tendencies. So how do we, what are the conditions that we need to modify our medicines? So if there are comorbidities like depression, epilepsy, hypertension, then we may have to make a choice. So amitriptyline may be particularly very useful in patients who have depression, while venlafaxine has been proven to be particularly useful in patients who have migraine and anxiety. Epilepsy, you need to decide about topiramate, sodium valproate, divalproex sodium. These are the ones which in particular would be useful. Whereas in hypertension, one might want to use lisinopril and candesartan if there is a associated, the hypertension is associated with migraine. Lamotrigine has been found useful in presence of hemiplegic migraine and migraine with aura. This I want that everyone should remember and try and use this. Then children and adolescents, we don't want to try too many stuff. So the ones which are most useful and pretty safe are flunarizine and topiramate with the usual precautions. And in pregnancy, the propranolol and amitriptyline again might be safer. And although one might want to discuss and try out non-pharmacological treatment first, rather than taking these medicines. And in menstrual migraine in particular, I want to draw your attention to this naproxen 500 milligrams twice daily or naratriptan twice daily, or if it is available to some persons through international purchase, then bromotriptan once a day for 1 week period starting 2 days prior to the expected date of a menstrual cycle. So that works very well. Well, we also need to discuss about chronic migraine plus or minus medication overuse headache. And botulinum toxin is a favorite of everyone who has read about the PREEMPT 1 and 2 trials. And at least 3 courses 4 months apart should be given before ruling out the benefit. That's the recommendation. It is useful particularly in patients with chronic migraine with or without overuse that we discussed, and topiramate is found useful in chronic migraine. So never forget topiramate. And neurostimulation, the non-invasive neurostimulation which has to be taken daily for prevention of migraine, that is Kefali device with TENS as well as TMS. TMS is also approved for both for acute indication as well as for prevention. And invasive stimulation may be required in some of the patients having very, very severe refractory migraine. We might want to stimulate the occipital nerve. Some people stimulate the supraorbital, spinopalatine ganglion, but further studies are still recommended. And then we talk about behavioral therapies that form the lifeline of the treatment of and prevention of migraine. So aim is to reduce the disability, improve the quality of life, and reduce the psychological comorbidity in patients having a migraine and some psychological problems. So it is indicated when the patient is having a severe impact, significant impact of migraine, and if the patients cannot take the medicines because of side effects, or if the patient's behavior or stress triggers migraine attack most of the time. So the things that is recommended in level A are relaxation therapy, thermal or EMG biofeedback, and cognitive behavioral therapy. So everyone must be aware of these things, which need to be written even in the pain management, the topics. And the most important thing is to try and discuss realistically with the patient what is going to be the duration of treatment. It's going to be a lifelong disease. We discuss with the patient, at least a long treatment is required. So usually when the patient starts getting relief, it is about 1 to 3 months from the beginning. Then after that 3 to 6 months, it should be continued and then followed by taper to try and understand whether the migraine is coming back. Usually most of the patients don't adhere to treatment either because of side effects or they don't have trust in the medicines. But what is seen is usually that they are about 30% of patients only are taking medicines at 6 months. It's very, very important to educate patients, to follow them up and to counsel them properly at the first visit only. So what is the outcome? The outcome is that we need to discuss the patient that outcome is not cure. Outcome is a 50% reduction can be a reasonable outcome. If that is not possible, then at least a reduction in the disability is desired. So one should not discontinue any medication before the trial with the desired dose is given for at least 2 to 3 months. So just don't keep on changing the medicine every month. So these are the references that I've used. I've used the Continuum 2018, Neurology Clinics 2019, and some guidelines of the German Headache Society and Neurology Society. So well, I stop here and I'd be glad to take any questions.
Am I audible? Dr.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic lectures by both Dr. Oza and Parasdevkar. I think in such a short time, both of them have managed to cover such extensive topics. Dr. Oza has covered almost everything about the treatment of migraine. A few questions for Dr. Oza. Why Rizatriptan is not advised while taking propranolol?
Well, I think there is, I'm not 100% sure just now, but I think there is some contraindication because of the cardiovascular conduction defect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not advised. Okay. Drug of choice in elderlies with migraine.
Elderly means mostly you have to consider the comorbidity. So I'm not sure if there is a drug of choice, but I would still continue with, if there is no a psychosis or anything like this, I would continue with my amitriptyline unless he is older than 65, 70, then I don't want to go. In that situation, I may discuss with the family and just put him on beta blockers. But there can be an additional possibility of doing valproate or topiramate. So I don't have a real drug of choice here, but it's open to discussion. Yes.
Absolutely. Divalproic sodium, Dr. Oza, would it be okay? 250 to 500 milligrams in elderly?
So both ways, your divalproic or sodium valproate both work. The only issue is that patients are different, and many times they go into hyperammonemia. So if there is a liver dysfunction.
Absolutely. Another question is, one of the patients is having migraine on propranolol 40 and amitriptyline 10 milligram since last 3 months, not improved. Should I change or add? I suppose the dose is small.
The doses, I would say that the way to choose the doses is to build up the dose till permissible level. So, the permissible level in in the propranolol would be at least 160 milligrams, if not 240 milligrams. Of course, the books write 320, but at least you should be on 160. And many times our patients, if they are not very drowsy, then it's a good idea to build up to at least 25 milligrams amitriptyline before you knock it out.
Absolutely. So increase the dosages.
Yes.
Is amitriptyline useful in classic migraine, the one with aura?
It should be useful. It doesn't separate, but you can choose an anti-epileptic agent in this migraine with aura. That would be better choice because it starts from cortical spreading depression. Yes.
Absolutely. And treatment for ophthalmoplegic migraine?
Well, ophthalmoplegic migraine, I think Dr. Kothari will tell better. But I think that the problem with ophthalmoplegic migraine is we don't know whether it is really migraine. So I feel that it's not really migraine. Yes.
Yeah, you're right. It's been taken out of migraine.
Yeah.
It's not really migraine. It's often an inflammatory disorder, something like Tolosahant or something. No?
Tolosahant or something, yeah. So somewhere, something near the superior orbital fissure or orbital apex.
Yeah, I think we are missing out something. So, we just say, thoda steroid de diya and he feels better than,
Absolutely. Somebody's asked, Dr. Kaminwar is asking, any experience of use of TMS in migraine?
TMS.
Yes.
So we have not used TMS in acute headache, but we have used in prevention of migraine. But those numbers are very, very small. So many of the patients, but it's an approved indication. So abroad, I think in UK at least, it's really available. But it's being an expensive, strategy, I would say, that because the handheld device is not available in India, so you can't give it to the patient to take it daily. For prevention, you have to take it daily. So that's the whole problem.
Absolutely. Prophylaxis for resistant migraine? Resistant.
Resistant means pharmacoresistant, then you keep on building your medicines, but also look back and see what you missed. So, you discuss with the patient whether you would like to qualify it as a refractory migraine, whether it is a medication overuse headache, or if there's some psychological underpinning. So, you need to discuss it out. Yes.
Patient do not have, how do you choose a drug when patient has no comorbidities, which means you're open without any comorbidity?
What is the age? We discussed the age also.
Yeah.
So if it is adolescent, then we need to give flunarizine, topiramate, something like that. little elder, non-childbearing age, then I would may not avoid valproate. I can give valproate. So, but I don't probably give topiramate so much for the risk of nephrolithiasis. Our patients may not understand nephrolithiasis. They may not understand glaucoma. So the follow becomes little bit. We've had 2 occasions where our patients landed with glaucoma. So I am not a big fan of topiramate, but I think in chronic migraine, it's a good drug.
Mechanism of action of botulinum toxin?
So mechanism of action of botulinum toxin is probably desensitization of the sensory nerve endings. And then the drug travels up to the thalamus and it does something over there. And they say that it travels beyond and it goes into the limbic system and does something more. So it's probably many mechanisms together. It's definitely not muscle contraction related.
Is it required to use USG KUB? I think this relates to the renal stones before starting.
It's a good idea. Yes. If you want to stay safe. Yeah, it's a good idea. I do it. Yes. And also an ophthal exam to look at IOPs.
Absolutely. Intraocular pressure, because those are the 2 main side effects. And the last question, can we try another triptan? So if one doesn't work, doesn't another work?
Yes. So lateral shift here works. Yes. You can try.
Okay.
Yes. But usually it would be a good idea to combine it with something. So maybe naproxen, because that is shown more efficacious rather than just shifting. So I would say that the choice in between the triptans is more for pharmacokinetics reason. So, sometimes you need a longer acting medicine, sometimes because the patient has a breakthrough again headache after one headache attack. So, so you need probably for that rather than like a lateral shift, but sometimes it works. So maybe almotriptan works sometimes. Elatriptan works better than sumatriptan. So that has been seen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oza. I think it was a very exhaustive session, very nice. And I think let's move on to the next one. The responsibility I've taken myself about recent advances in migraine treatment after Dr. Oza's really thorough lecture. So I'll begin my slideshow. Okay, so after Dr. Oza and Palazevkar have laid their foundations about understanding and standard understanding of the pathogenesis of migraine and the standard therapeutic agents for both acute and preventive therapy for migraine, I am now going to cover as much as possible recent advances in migraine treatment. And as you can see, the points I have covered is the pathophysiology biomarkers, because they lay the foundation for understanding and building up the recent advances in therapy. The 5-HT1 receptor agonists, the CGRP agonist GPINs, the MABs obviously, and a little bit on ongoing research at the horizon. And last couple of points, the same old triptans reformulated and non-drug therapy. I think Dr. Oza has already covered it. I'm just going to mention it again. Pathophysiology and biomarkers, Dr. Palazevkar has thoroughly covered them. I put this slide so that you understand how each aspects of the pathogenesis were picked up by researchers into getting an understanding so that they could develop drug models, the drug models for each new recently discovered drug, such as inflammatory cascade, CGRP, nerve growth factors are also being worked at, and central sensitization allodynia for non-drug therapy such as cognitive behavior therapies. Before we go on to study each of the novel drug, we need to understand what were the objectives in migraine studies. In migraine prevention studies, there were reduction in mean monthly migraine days, more than 50% reduction in monthly migraine days, mean change in headache hours from baseline, reduced use of acute medication, and improvement in migraine disability assessment scores. Two endpoints for acute drug trials were obviously 2-hour pain freedom and a novel concept, 2-hour freedom from most bothersome symptoms, which are nausea, photophobia or phonophobia. So with this, we will begin our first group of agents, DITANs. We all know they are the 5-HT1F antagonists for acute migraine as acute migraine medication. Why we needed them? Because there were limitations with triptans, as Dr. Oza said. Not all patients respond, not all patients tolerate, and they are contraindicated in cardiovascular or cerebrovascular disease because of their agonism 1B, which leads to vasoconstriction. That paved a path for DITANs. Two of them, the ones that I have mentioned, lasmiditan and the other one, lasmiditan in the dose that I have mentioned, have been now well tried and tested and US FDA approved after these two cardinal trials, and then another trial which is ongoing, of which interim analysis has already shown excellent efficacy as well. 2-hour pain freedom is about 30%. It's slightly less than traditional triptans, but with less adverse effects than triptans, and the adverse effects are more likely due to activation of 5-HT1F receptors, which are more central. So they do not cause vasoconstriction, unlike the traditional triptans. Let us now look at CGRP and its receptor. Both Dr. Pearlsdev has taught us to peripheral sensitization of trigeminal nociceptors. CGRP in the trigeminal nucleus caudalis facilitates activation of nociceptive second order neurons. It's also involved in development and maintenance of persistent pain and central sensitization. It is a 37 amino acid neuropeptide, and it exists as alpha and beta, two forms derived from separate genes. Alpha is the one responsible for migraine, and its receptor is a G protein coupled receptor, the main form expressed in the trigeminal neurons. And there are three subunits, as we know: receptor activity modifying protein 1, calcitonin-like receptor, and receptor component protein. The alpha CGRP receptors are located on all sides. You may remember Dr. Pearlsdevkar's slide of the brain, cortex, amygdala, thalamus, and brainstem nuclei, as well as the cerebral arteries. So the pathogenesis related to CGRP is that receptor activation leads to protein kinase A activation and phosphorylation of NMDA-R1. You remember glutamate is the key neurotransmitter for cortical spreading depression. CGRP release in the meninges also causes vasodilatation, mast cell granulation, thus releasing pro-inflammatory agents and neurogenic inflammation. Remember, even triptans prevent release of CGRP, thus interrupting all above cascade. Proofs that CGRP plays a role in migraine are that CGRP gets released during acute migraine attack. CGRP levels in the cranial circulation as well as saliva are increased during migraine, and infusion can provoke an attack, and normalization of levels have been seen after triptan treatment. So a simple diagram. Number 1 is the blue CGRP receptor, on which the CGRP receptor monoclonal antibody as well as the CGRP small molecule antagonist GPANs act on. Number 2 is the CGRP itself, on which the CGRP monoclonal antibodies act on. Number 3 is the 5-HT1B1D receptor, the substrate for triptans. And number 4 is the 5-HT1F receptor, the substrate for DITANs. This is a simplistic diagram which you can use when you're writing an answer. With that, we'll learn about the small molecule CGRP receptor antagonist GPANs. The first generation were developed beginning with olkegipant as an IV, in an IV route with problems of short half-life and low in vivo potency, so it was discontinued. This was followed by development of 3 oral agents, including telkegepant. But the problems came up with liver toxicity, so were discontinued. But this paved a pathway for a second generation gepants, of which and all of them again were oral. And the second generation ubrogepant got FDA approval after 2 cardinal trials in the doses that I have mentioned, which was followed by rimegepant, again received FDA approval for acute migraine, and a trial of which is ongoing for prophylactic, and then another gepant, atogepant, is in last stage of pre-approval as prophylactic. The advantages being no liver, cardiovascular and cerebrovascular concerns, no vasoconstriction, same to our pain freedom as triptans, better tolerability, no medication overuse problem, and no need for dichotomous view, which means no 2 separate molecules for acute attack and prevention, because these can address both issues. With monoclonal antibodies, so we have 4 monoclonal antibodies. One is completely human, erenumab, and it acts on CGRP receptor, and 3, eptinezumab, fremanezumab, and galcanezumab are humanized, and they act on the CGRP ligand itself. And the last 3 received FDA approval between May 2018 to till date, and later on have also received European Medical Agency approval, and eptinezumab has received US FDA approval recently in February this year. The last 3 can be administered subcutaneously, mainly monthly. Fremanezumab in a dose of 675 milligrams can also be administered every 3 monthly. And eptinezumab, the IV infusion, is again administered every 3 monthly. All of them have had robust trials for both episodic and chronic migraine. You may not necessarily write the names, I have just mentioned them to make you aware of the cardinal trials that brought them into market after FDA approval. And as you can see, the side effects there are no serious side effects. These are the ones that I have listed, and just remember a few and you can write them during the exam. They are efficacious in all 3 main objectives: reduction in mean monthly migraine days, more than 50% reduction in monthly migraine days, and reduced acute medication use. Potential advantages are specificity, wide therapeutic targets, episodic as well as chronic migraine, medication overuse headache, and for galcanezumab, also episodic cluster headache, which we are going to learn in our next module, module number 2. Ease of use, convenience and adherence, as I just said, quick onset of action, 1 to 2 days with IV and 5 to 7 days with subcutaneous. Patients continued to improve even after 6th month, large absolute effect of treatment, lesser need for acute migraine specific medication, improved performance on headache-free days, and works on subjects who previously failed multiple preventives. Tolerability is similar to placebo, no severe or major cardiovascular adverse events, and erenumab and fremanezumab are beneficial when added to ongoing oral preventive therapies as well. Benefits over gepants are that they have longer duration of action. MABs are highly specific, can provide more effective blockade. They don't need blood-brain barrier penetration unlike gepants, so no central side effects. Elimination not involving liver, so not hepatotoxic. No toxic metabolites after metabolism, and adverse events with MABs are comparable to placebo. But there are certain safety and other issues regarding blocking of CGRP. CGRP is also involved in homeostatic responses during acute ischemic events, tissue healing and hematopoiesis. So they may pose risk in subjects with cardiovascular diseases. They may unmask underlying autoimmunity or worsen active infection. We have just around 2 years of experience, so long-term effects are still unknown. Certain critical reviewers say that there is a high placebo effect in some trials. Anti-drug antibodies after years of MAB exposure may cause some neutralizing effect. We are uncertain whether they will sustain their efficacy after many years. and they cannot be used still in pregnant women. And then there are other issues such as, can we predict, maybe through biomarkers, as to which patients respond and which do not to CGRP drugs? Can we combine GPINs and MABs, or maybe block both the CGRP and CGRP receptor? And does blocking of CGRP or its receptor alter regulation of CGRP receptor, which means would there be tolerance and we may have to increase dose, or would there be upregulation of receptors and the dose may be decreased? We don't know about that. With that, I end the CGRP concept, and I'm going to have use this one slide for ongoing research. Couple of areas, first being Spiegelmers. Spiegelmer is a chemically synthesized mirror image oligonucleotide that binds its target with high specificity. And so CGRP targeted Spiegelmers have been tested. There was one which was developed, but its development was halted because it also binds to another CGRP receptor called amylin, and amylin is crucial, is present in pancreas and crucial for neoglucogenesis, which we did not want to block. And another one has been tested in vivo, and it inhibits plasma protein extravasation in rat dura mater after exposure for 18 hours. Then another concept, anti-pituitary adenylate cyclase activating polypeptide monoclonal antibodies are produced. There is one against its receptor, which has undergone a phase 2 clinical trial, and we are awaiting its results. Next concept is about reformulation of triptans. Dr. Oza has made a passing remark. I'm going to have a few bullets on that. We have permeation enhancer for nasal sumatriptan with a permeation enhancing excipient, and we have adhesive dermally applied microarray for zolmitriptan for intracutaneous drug administration, and both trials have shown significant number of patients pain-free at 2 hours, free of most bothersome symptoms, and sustained pain freedom as well. The advantages being that they bypass GIT, so smaller doses and less systemic side effects. There is ease of administration, and so they're widely used and well liked. My last slide, Dr. Oza has already mentioned. I'll just make a passing remark again on neuromodulation, non-medical treatment strategies in the form of single pulse transcranial magnetic stimulation, on which you also ask questions. The mechanisms of the TMS as well as VNS relate to altering the nociceptive trigeminothalamic or trigeminal vascular transmission, and the TMS is approved for both acute and preventive, licensed for both. VNS, however, is licensed as acute treatment, and we all know recently stimulation of the supraorbital region with external trigeminal nerve stimulation, which alters the brain activity in the orbitofrontal and cingulate cortices, is licensed for both acute as well as preventive, and it is delivered through a device called Kefali. And these are my important references, Peter Goadsby, and there are a couple of them in addition to the neurology clinics and the continuum, which also I have referred. Thank you very much. I think this was what I wanted to say on recent advances. Thanks again. Okay, so do I have questions actually? I think I need to stop sharing. Mansik, how can I stop sharing the slides?
I'll do it for you, 1 minute.
Yeah. Are there any questions for this session? Okay, good. Oh God, so many questions. Okay. So, had I not shared my screen? My screen was seen, wasn't it?
Yeah, your screen was being seen. So
okay.
Your screen.
Okay. Please send a link. Okay, can I throw some microlepsy? Uh, I think there aren't much specific questions related to my area, my lecture itself on the recent advances. Practical application, just a minute. Practical application of any of these recent advances in Indian settings in your experience. Yes, I think we are doing a trial, a phase 3 open label trial on galcanezumab and lasmiditan, on which we managed to recruit, I think, more than 10 patients. And we followed them up for more than 4-5 months now, and we've had good experience with both these medicines, galcanezumab, the ligand antibody, CGRP antibody, and lasmiditan as an acute for acute prevention, acute therapy for migraine. That's the answer to the question. We have no experience as yet on the other monoclonal antibodies or the GPINs. I think that's all the questions for my recent advances. So with this, I'll proceed and request Dr. Ruikar to begin his lecture on New Delhi persistent headache. Dr. Oza, you want to say something?
So great talk, Shripad. Just wanted to ask you really, the acute that CG receptor antagonist, do you think it is available or it is going to be available to us?
As of now, it's not available in India, but we expect it would be available in next 6 months to a year or so.
Do you see a real scope?
I have no personal experience in GPINs, but all the science that I have read backing it, I feel that it's promising. First of all, these are one of the first drugs acting directly on the basic pathogenesis. Number two, CGRP as a concept is now well established. Number three, there have been thousands of patients with GPINs for acute therapy. Literature has already poured in. I think for acute therapy, certainly. For prophylactic, the literature is yet not that large for GPINs, but for the monoclonal antibodies, even for prophylaxis, there is literature with thousands of patients.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, Dr. Ruikar is already ready with his slides, screen sharing, and I request him to proceed with his last talk for the session today, NDPH.
Sure.
After you.
Hi, very good evening. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yeah, you need to be a bit louder, Dr. Ruikar.
Yeah, sure. So very good evening to everybody. And at the outset, I sincerely thanks Dr. Shripad sir, the FINE and all the team for giving me opportunity to deliver the talk. And to all the participants who are from their busy schedule, take out the time to came for this online CME. It's a wonderful initiative and many more things to come in a recent future. So after a lot of common stuff, now we will be discussing for next 10 minutes or so regarding one of the rare things which is not so common as migraines and all, which is NDPH. We all have at least seen 1 or 2 patients of it or read in the books, a little different, bizarre and odd situation. So this new onset Delhi headache, so basically it comes in a category of the chronic, it comes in the category of the chronic daily headache. So,
one minute. Sorry to interrupt. Dr. Ruikar, your screen sharing has stopped.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'd request all the other panelists to not select the share screen setting. Yeah, Dr. Ruikar, you can start sharing your screen.
Now it's okay.
Yes, it's fine. It's fine. Only screen you will have to put it in the slideshow mode.
Right. So the chronic daily headache. So we all know when we talk of chronic, it is definitely more than 3 months or so. And it's a daily headache. So practically every day this headache is troubling to the patient. So the chronic daily headache is a descriptive term which encompasses a lot of several different subtypes of headaches, which have got generally long duration, on an average 4 hours or more in a day. They last for 3 months or more. The common chronic daily headaches are the chronic migraine or the chronic persistent migraine, chronic tension type headache or CTTH, which we are commonly well versed with, then medication overuse headache, hemicrania continua, and new daily persistent headache or NDPH. So these 5 are the common things of the chronic daily headaches. Out of that, one of the recent entry is NDPH. So it is quite recently described. It happened that in one of the headache conferences, I happened to listen to the person who has described it, and including Dr. Rappaport, who was taking his interview. And he was told that by only listening to the patients in their all semiology, he was found out this particular form of the headache in 1986. So it is a unique syndrome in which the person remembers he has got the headache and he can tell you exactly date of headache even after so many months and years. And he will tell you that from that day or from that particular time or from that particular event, he has got headache and which is not remitting till today. And most of the time it is in months or years. So 80% or more patients can pinpoint their exact day of headache when it started. So as we have discussed, this is one of the recent most entries in the headache basket, and which was described in 1986 as a form of chronic daily headache, and it is in the ICD-10 criteria as well. So most of the time it is in one of the studies which was done in 2002, what are the things which is commonly called as triggers which has caused this headache. So in this NDPH, some people remember after some febrile illness, they have got headache started and which is unremitting till today. Sometime after some of the surgery, most of the time they are the extracranial surgery like traumas, like appendix or some of the other things like that, which may not be a cranial surgery. Sometimes it can be after some head injury also, or sometimes a stressful event in life like somebody's death or a big quarrel or something like that. So which are common things which are called as triggers. So NDPH can have got common occurrence after infection like flu-like illness, extracranial surgery or stressful event in a 30%, 12% and 12% respectively. While after some time, some people may not remember exactly the triggering event, but they will remember the time or possibly the weeks from where they have started. In one of the initial patients I have seen, right, one of the very first patient I have seen of the chronic daily headache, I remember, he has told me 2 years after his marriage, 2 days after his appendix surgery, he has got the headache, and for last around years, he has got almost every day, more than 6 to 8 hours in a day, he has got the headache, which has got associated with sometimes photophobia, phonophobia, sometimes it is tight or tight band-like situation, but most of the time it is not with nausea. And this person himself was a pharmacist working in one of the medical colleges. So most of the time, these people will remember the event after which it has got triggered. So, which are the common viral infections that will trigger? So it is supposed that EBV might be notorious for this. In a case control study, they have found out that the EBV serology positive in 85% of the NDPH patients, vis-a-vis 25% in a control group. Also CMV and HSV, they have also found out to be serology positive. In first 60 days of infection, the headache was started in these patients. So how common this headache is there? Generally, NDPH is there in 0.01 to 0.07% of the people having headache or the common populations. It is more common in males, like it is practically double common in males as compared to the females, 1.3 versus 2.5%. And what is the age? It can seen right from the pediatric population to the elderly population. And what are the common things? So the common age in the females, it will see a little bit earlier age in their 30s And while in men, it will be more common in their 50s, as per the studies. So the clinical feature wise, there was a little bit conflicts previously. Initially, in a previous headache criteria, which was published in 2004, they told that the headache may not be migraine type. But after a lot of studies and discussions within the headache experts, 70% to 60% people having NDPH has got migraine phenotypes. So the headache type might be of migraine phenotype. Sometimes it might be tension type headache phenotype, and it has got different variants. So duration might be, say, few hours. Most of the time it is 1.5 hours to 24 hours. And around 60-70% of the time, they will say 6 to 8 hours in a day. The key thing is that 80% will remember the exactly date when it has started. Sometimes it might be a time of a day. Sometimes they will say after this time, I woke up from my sleep with the headache. They will say there is hardly any pain-free interval in between, in the days in between. And the baseline pain intensity is typically moderate, which is a tolerable, although significant portion of the patient will experience most of the time the pain. So 60 to 80% of the time it is a bilateral, it can be holocranial, or it can be localized to one region of the head, most commonly the occipital region. Sometimes temporal or retroorbital also. So sometimes it is a migraine like throbbing, sometimes it might be pressure-like, sometimes with tight band-like situations, and sometimes it will be little bit refractory to medications. That's what the patient is going to tell you. So as we know, it is a primary headache. So examination is typically normal. Except there is some small point, like few people will tell there's a little bit trigger point at their occipital region, especially in the greater occipital nerve trigger point, which might be little which is tender. And recently there was one study which suggests that a cervical fascicle inflammation might have got to do something with the pathophysiology of this headache. But that is still not proven. Also, we have seen the viral etiology or some trauma. So it has been studied why this particular virus is causing the problem also, but it is not possibly the virus. It was suggested that some neuroinflammation got triggered at that point of time of the event, and the headache started. But why does it last so long, which is not clear till now? It is supposed that the trigger or the triggering event act in a predisposed patient. As we know about the migraine has got some predisposition. So similarly, the people having NDPH has got some predisposition for headache, and the triggering event just cause the predisposed person triggering of the headache, which starts from that point of time. But why it lasts for so long, so many years, months, but still it is a point of debate in the experts only. So neurological examination is typically normal. Possibly there might be a little bit occipital tightness or a triggering. As we have seen, the previous ICDH2 criteria has excluded patients having migraine phenotypes, but the recent, which is 2018 criteria, which includes a migraine phenotype. So the phenotype in the form of type of headache, the severity, intensity, photophobia, phonophobia, which will vary in people to people, but which will be in a tune of 60 to 70%. So evaluation. In a patient having primary headache, the evaluation is done to rule out the secondary causes of the headache, as we all know. So since it's a new headache in the initial form, we don't want to miss the red flags. So we will not miss out the red flags. Secondly, in the NDPH, MRI is suggested with especially MR Vino and contrast also, and it is supposed to come as a normal. Also, generally hypercoagulable state to be ruled out, the papilledema has to be ruled out. MR venography should be normal. In some patient, if there is a history of infection or if you are suspecting VIH or IIH, CSF might be required. And in a more than 50 years patient, giant cell arteritis should be ruled out with CRP and ESR, as we know. So what are the common differential diagnoses for this type of headache? Since it is a primary headache, which will mimic with other types of primary headache, it might confused with chronic tension type headache or chronic persistent migraine, but the history, the date of onset will take you to the diagnosis of this particular type of headache. So the one single important point for this particular type of headache is a clear recall of onset, which is necessary point or necessary factor to diagnose the patient having NDPH. And if the patient has got strictly unilateral headache for so many years or months, a trial of indomethacin is recommended to rule out hemicrania continuum. The secondary causes of headache, which might last a little bit long and which need to be ruled out, are AV malformation, brain tumor, chronic meningitis, chronic SDH, dural AV fistulas, leptomeningeal metastasis, post-traumatic headache, spinodal sinusitis, subarachnoid hemorrhage. As we know, the list is comprehensive and still more points can be added. So secondary causes need to be ruled out. So what are the prognosis? Since we're talking about some headache which might last for months to years, the expert have found out there are two forms. One is non-persisting and one is persisting. When it was initially described in 86, the first form, that is which might be self-limiting form, was described. But after new case reports and studies were added, and the persisting form was added in the NDPH. So there is a self-limiting form. Though it is self-limiting, still it might take several months or sometimes years. And there is a persisting form, which is commonly refractory to most of any line of treatment, including so many medications, counselings also. And most likely the refractory form or the persisting form, which we are going to see in our clinics. So what is treatment? As we know, this is a typical medication refractory headache. But what is the type of phenotype should be get treated? If it's a migraine or chronic migraine or tension type headache, the initial factor can be treated like that. A trial of indomethacin can be done. So most of the time, all these things will be done. And since we're talking something which is lasting for months, and after 3 months, patient will tell that I have got hardly any relief with most of the medications. So the bottom line is most of the patients don't improve with any form of medications. So many headache specialists consider NDPH to be most refractory of all headache disorders. Though there are case reports that some patient, especially they might be in a remitting form or the treatable form, got relief with tizanidine, baclofen, amitriptyline, fluoxamine, paroxetine, or sometime with propranolol, atenolol, gabapentin, or neuroblock also. But there are case reports only. To conclude, NDPH is a headache, which is a chronic form of headache, which lasts for months to years. To start, generally the patient has to remember the onset or possibly the date or the event since the headache started. The diagnosis is essentially clinical. Headache generally start abruptly. It is generally daily, which is unremitting. The phenotype might be migraine or non-migraine form. Most of the time, he might have seen a lot of doctors or taken a lot of medications before seeing you, but it is typically refractory, which can last for decades and which is challenging to treat. One of the things which crosses this particular type of headache is the medication overuse headache. To differentiate between these two, the medication overuse headache has got already headache. The patient is using analgesics for too many days. And once you stop the medications, the headache will remit, which is not the case for this particular type of headache. And the second point is, before starting NDPH, the patient is essentially normally, or he has got not a typical type of headache except for around 20 to 30% of migraine is reported. So previously there is no use of medication overuse for this particular type of headache, and which differentiates from the medication overuse headache. So that's all from my side for today evening. And so this is a little bit unusual type of headache that difficult to treat. And so the diagnosis is clinical, and the counseling part of patient is one of the important aspects from treating point of view. Thank you. Yeah. I'm not able to listen.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so wonderful. It's a very comprehensive lecture on this relatively uncommon type of headache, and you covered it very well in sort of 10-12 minutes. There are a few questions. What should be ruled out before labeling NDPH? I think you already said, but you can tell them again.
So what should be ruled out? As we know, this is a primary headache. In a primary headache, generally two things we will take care. First, we should not miss the red flags. We all know about the red flags. And secondly, we should rule out the secondary causes. And in the primary headaches, one of the treatable form, which is either cluster or hemicrania. So a trial of indomethacin can be given. So that is the thing. And the most important part of NDPH is the patient has to remember clearly, and which he will tell for 80% of the time, the exact possible date of onset. And that's what the criteria tells.
My electricity kept going on. I'm switching off and on.
Oh, okay. Well, you are now visible. So in relation to that, Dr. Ruikar, would every NDPH mandate a CSF examination, or would you go case by case?
No, it is generally case by case. Rather, most of this patient, they don't require CSF. Because if you go by the criteria given by the International Headache Society, it doesn't recommend CSF study first. Secondly, you can do CSF. The CSF is recommended in two forms. Either you are thinking some chronic infection in the form of pox or idiopathic intracranial hypertension, or you are thinking some chronic meningitis due to the carcinomatous meningitis or something like that. So you are suspecting some secondary form of headache with the background of history of that. So in a primarily CSF is not required for diagnosis of this particular type of headache.
Unless there is
what percentage of NDPH would have anxiety or depression or some psychological comorbidity? Because I seem to have whatever patients I see seem to be essentially psychological coma, unless of course it's a subacute, 1 month, 2 month history, elderly person where you are thinking of malignancy or temporal arteritis. But those who have more than 6 months, 1 year, no neuro deficit or everything normal, usually they are, I have found, even if we call it NDPH or we give it whatever name, often there is some psychological comorbidity.
So, actually, they have not found out the psychological comorbidities. They have studied about photophobia, phonophobia, and all migraine phenotypes and CTTH phenotype. They're saying around 60 to 70% chronic migraine phenotype.
So, do you mean by that then a large part are chronic migraine, which present as NDPH, and in some, but then those are the ones where in spite of having the migraine phenotype, the standard therapies still do not work on them. And so others are precipitating factors, as Kothari sir is saying, which apply for migraine, do apply for these subtypes of NDPH.
Yeah, and they say it is reflected to even that chronic migraine treatment.
It is somewhere like that. Okay, a few questions. First line treatment for NDPH, and if it is drug refractory.
Yeah, the current guideline says that to say the NDPH, it has to be more than 3 months since it is a chronic migraine. So you can, you have to find out the phenotype. So the phenotype is like chronic tension type headache or migraine type headache. You can just treat it accordingly. Try if it is fitting in that. If it is not, then because typically 80% time this particular type is said to be medicine refractory. So there are only case reports which so many plethora of drugs they are tried, and there are only case reports for few patients getting treated with that, and possibly they are saying they are the treatable form of this particular headache.
There's a question why we should use this term NDPH at all when already we have chronic daily headache as a term. Why do we need it?
Yeah, because this is supposed to be a different clinical entity. Which is a different clinical entity, which is different than the chronic daily headache.
Yes, chronic daily. Chronic daily, I think, is a basket made up of, again, many things, isn't it? Yeah.
That's what we have seen initially. So we have to got more than 4 hours in a day headache for more than 3 months, and which can include 4 or 5 different differential diagnoses. Absolutely. Out of which some are treatable. If you have a chronic cluster or if you have got hemicrania continua, which are treatable.
Absolutely.
One thing we must all, I think, understand, and this thing is, all these definitions are empirical. There is no biomarker for anything. There is no biomarker for migraine. There is no biomarker for tension headache. No biomarker for NDPH. So we have made criteria. Somebody with headache, with nausea, with vomiting, we call migraine. Somebody with this, we call tension type headache. Somebody with XYZ who fits these criteria, we call NDPH. So that question whoever asked is valid. Do we need? Yes, the Headache Society needs, it requires to divide things into, you know, these very clear-cut classifications. But we know that in actual practice, patients do not lie on these. There's a lot of overlap. There are many patients who fit sometimes tension type headache, sometimes migraine, sometimes NDPH, sometimes chronic daily headache. So these are just arbitrary criteria laid down. And this is like the what the DSM-4, DSM-5 approach, where you lay down the XXXXX, then you call it anxiety neurosis. XYZ, you call it depression. So these are a different way of classification. This is not like Cox finding AFB, then you call it Cox. So
yes. Absolutely. There's one question: occipital nerve block in NDPH and chronic migraine. Occipital nerve block.
Actually, occipital nerve block, they have tried, and there are reports in NDPH, but there are only reports, which is only 5 or 6 patient report, and in others which has not succeeded also. So if you have got occipital nerve neuralgia, possibly it will work. Then they are saying if you can stimulate the nerve, possibly people are saying it might respond to some migraine patients. But classically, the NDPH should not respond to the occipital nerve block. But you might have got tenderness over the occipital nerve.
Absolutely. And even for chronic migraine, I think occipital nerve block has not helped. It is the paratrochlear and this thing. Dr. Oza.
So I will just talk about this thing in obviously in migraine. So the recommendation is to give occipital nerve block. Is like a recommendation is there for experts. The ones who are trained in giving occipital nerve block, they should give, and also it should be given in patients who are having no relief with other things. So when I went to Stanford for a short fellowship for headache, in that headache clinic, it was very, very routine. I am telling you, like every second patient, they used to give greater occipital nerve block. And the idea was that it's a 5-minute job and the headache relief is instant. Like, the patient walks out, the headache is gone. And, it was also used when the patient returned after 2 months, and when it was done in the Botox clinic. So when the patient was returning from, after 2 months or 3 months, when the headache was wearing, the effect of Botox was wearing off, that time they used to give top up of greater occipital nerve block. So, by that time you calm chalao for 1 more month, and then the insurance pays after 4 months.
Okay.
So, it is like that. So, but if you read the recommendations of AHS and Canadian and German, they say that it can be given, but it should be given in, it should be tried further. So that is the thing.
I have tried it in chronic daily headaches, and I think it's a cheap, very easy and very cheap and very.
Absolutely, I give it routinely.
Yes. I mean, it's just lignocaine and steroid. Local, it's a 5-minute job.
It works best if there is a local tenderness. That is what Devashish was pointing out. That if there is a local tenderness, it works like anything. But I had one patient who we unfortunately infiltrated the periosteum, and then there was more pain. So you should avoid the periosteum. It should be a under the skin injection. Don't try to search for the nerve.
Yeah. And there are a lot of figures how to search where.
Absolutely.
It's very easy.
Yeah.
Okay, good session.
Great. I think we've finished addressing most of the questions as well. And I think we were very anxious, Dr. Kothari and everybody, as to taking up such big topics and trying to fit them in a span of 15-20.
But your speakers did a great job.
I think they've all done a great job. I think I'm very happy the way both presentations went. Great. Thank you very much. All of
the question was that, Shripad, that we were discussing that how can you talk about treatment of migraine in one question like this, 20 minutes? Can be one whole session,
Absolutely.
But if an examiner has asked that as a question, then that means that is a question. That means they want you to write it in 20 minutes also. And we have to teach the students how to write this treatment of migraine in 20 minutes. pathophysiology of migraine in 20 minutes. Then you narrow it down and just say G-pants in migraine, again 20 minutes. So you should be able to write any question, expand it, shorten it. And I think all of you all did a great job.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much to all of you who have been with me all the time and supported this initiative. Thank you, thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much, Shripad and Dr. Kothari as well.
This is Shripad's baby now. Huh? So
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I think it will be everybody's baby, and many speakers are going to be, called